Today, we are diving into a really fascinating story about how a single court decision completely upended global trade literally overnight. It's a tale of two tariffs, where one country's legal drama created instant economic winners and losers all across the world.
So let me just start with this question. What if a huge foundational piece of US trade policy, we're talking something that affects billions of dollars in goods, just vanished? One day it's there, the next it's gone. What happens then?
Well, this isn't a hypothetical. On February 20th of this year, that is exactly what happened. In a pretty huge decision, the U.S. Supreme Court basically erased an entire category of tariffs. This kicked off an immediate, high-stakes scramble to fill that policy vacuum, and it sent shockwaves through the entire global economy.
Okay, so let's get into the decision itself. What did the court actually rule, and why did it cause such a massive shakeup?
The ruling was really clear-cut. It was a 6-3 vote. And what it did was it disallowed the use of something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to impose certain tariffs. This immediately got rid of the so-called reciprocal tariffs and others that were aimed at countries like China. Now, what's really important to remember is that this didn't touch tariffs that were under other laws, like the Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos. Nope, those stayed put.
And the money involved here? It is absolutely staggering. We are talking about an estimated $180 billion that had been collected under this now illegal authority. And the thinking is that this huge sum is now going to be refunded to the importers who paid it. I mean, that is a massive amount of cash getting injected back into the system, all because of this one court ruling.
So to really get what the administration did next, we have to kind of untangle the legal mess they were in. You might be asking, why couldn't they just keep the tariffs going under a different law? Well, it all boils down to the huge differences between two key statutes, IEEPA and Section 122. Gotta understand, U.S. trade law is this complex web, right? There are different tools for different jobs. The old authority they were using, IEEPA, had pretty much unlimited power. No cap on the rate, no time limit, but its replacement, Section 122, is way more restricted. And then you've got these other tools, like Section 301 and 232, but they're for very specific things, like unfair trade or national security.
And this comparison really shows you the corner they were backed into. They went from IEEPA, a legal sledgehammer with basically no limits, to Section 122, which is more like a tiny little tack hammer. It's got a hard cap of 15%, and this is the really critical part, it has a super short lifespan of just 150 days. The replacement just wasn't anywhere near as powerful.
So, with their main tool suddenly gone, the administration had to pivot, and they had to do it fast. What we saw next was a rapid-fire replacement. One tariff out and a brand new one in.
What they did is what people are calling a tariff swap. The second the IEEPA tariffs were struck down, a new global tariff was announced. This new policy was anchored to that much weaker law, Section 122, and they immediately set the rate at 15%, the absolute highest they were legally allowed to go under that new statute.
And there's that number again. 150 days. This is the ticking clock hanging over this whole new policy. It is not a permanent solution, not even close. It's a temporary patch that, by law, has an expiration date. This just kicks the can down the road and creates even more uncertainty.
Okay, so this sudden swap had immediate and wildly different effects all around the world. It really did become a tale of two continents, creating very clear winners and very clear losers, at least in the short run.
And this isn't just our take. Analysts from Goldman Sachs basically said, look, for most of Asia, this tariff swap actually meant a net reduction in the tariffs they were paying on their goods. It was immediate, even if it was temporary relief.
And you can see it right here. This change was a huge benefit to pretty much every major Asian economy. The effective U.S. tariff rate dropped for countries all across the board, from China to Vietnam to Indonesia. But the number one winner, by a long shot, China. The tariffs it was facing were effectively slashed by 6.6 percentage points. That is a massive change in the world's biggest and most complicated trade relationship.
But now, let's shift our focus over to Europe, because for them, the narrative completely flips on its head. This policy swap wasn't a relief at all.
So let's just look at the math here for the EU and the UK. That green bar you see, that's the tariff relief they got from the Supreme Court's ruling. But then look at the blue bar next to it. That's the new 15% global tariff, and it's bigger. So for Europe, the net result was actually a tariff increase. So what does that mean in real numbers? Well, the effective tariff rate on goods from the EU went up by almost a full percentage point. And for the UK, it was even worse. It jumped by nearly 3 percentage points.
So the exact same policy that gave relief to Asia actually meant higher costs for Europe. Crazy, right?
All of this brings us to the really big question. What on earth happens next? Because remember, we are now on a 150-day countdown.
You know, what's so fascinating to me is that despite all this drama, winners in Asia, losers in Europe, the overall impact on the average U.S. tariff rate was actually pretty small. It only dropped by about 1 percentage point. So the real story here isn't about the total amount of tariffs being collected, it's about who is paying them.
So this timeline really lays out the uncertain road ahead. Right now, we've got this temporary 15% tariff. But on July 24th, boom, it legally expires. After that, well, the administration is probably going to try to use other, more permanent legal tools, like Section 301, to put new tariffs in place. And that could restart this whole crazy process all over again.
So that's where we are. The current situation is just a temporary patch, a 150-day stopgap measure. With the next move totally up in the air, it really makes you wonder, what does this level of instability, where entire trade policies can be erased and redrawn overnight, really mean for the future of global trade?